All right, so today in Algebra 2, we're looking at section 2.5, completing the square, okay? After today, you should be able to solve quadratic equations by completing the square. So let's do some review information. So let's review what a perfect square trinomial is. So remember that perfect square trinomials are quadratics, which are the results of squaring binomials. So if I have x plus 3 quantity squared, if I FOILed that out, okay, or did our shortcut, so remember our shortcut says you take the very first term, you square it, so x squared, then you multiply the two terms together, so 3x and double it, so that's 2 times 3x gets us 6x, and then the last term squared, so 3 squared, 9. So x squared plus 6x plus 9 is a perfect square trinomial. So we're going to start out solving using square roots to solve quadratic equations. Okay, so first we want to recognize that the quadratic expression is a perfect square trinomial. So I have x squared plus 14x plus 49. So I need to recognize that as a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so and then we want to factor the perfect square trinomial. Okay, so I still have 25 on this side equals this side, so it's going to be factored down to one set of parentheses quantity squared. Okay. The 49 have been my last term squared. The x was my first term squared. So the square root of x squared is x. Then these are all plus. So plus, I take the square root of 49, 7 quantity squared. So x plus 7 quantity squared gives me x squared plus 14x plus 49. Now we want to solve that. So take the square root of both sides because we want to get rid of x plus 7 quantity squared, square root of both sides. Remember, when you put the square root into the problem, you have two answers, positive and negative. So the square root of 25 is positive and negative 5 equals x plus. So now I want to solve. So subtract 7 from both sides. So I have positive 5 minus 7 and negative 5 minus 7. Those are going to be my two answers. So then I get x is equal to, so 5 minus 7 gets me negative 2, and negative 5 minus 7 gets me negative 12. So let's do a few more examples like that. So number 2, I have 81 equals x squared plus 12x plus 36. So x squared plus 12x plus 36, okay, I notice that 36, the square root of 36 is 6. 6x times 2 gives me 12x. So this is a perfect square trinomial. So this is 81 equals x plus 6 quantity squared. Square root of both sides. Square root of 81, positive and negative 9 equals x plus 6. Subtract 6 from both sides. So I have 9 minus 6 and negative 9 minus 6 as my two x values. So here 9 minus 6, x is equal to 3. Negative 9 minus 6, x is equal to negative 15. So my two answers, positive 3, negative 15. All right, let's look at another one of those. 9 equals x squared minus 16x plus 64. Again, I have to recognize the perfect square trinomial. So if I take the square root of 64, it's 8. 8 times 2 is 16. So this is a perfect square trinomial. So it factors 9 equals parentheses x. This time, because it says minus 16x, it's going to be minus 8 quantity squared. Take the square root of both sides. Again, the square root of 9 is positive and negative 3 equals x minus 8. Add 8 to both sides. So 3 plus 8 is x. And negative 3 plus 8 is my other answer. So 3 plus 8 gets me 11. Negative 3 plus 8 gets me 5. Those are our two answers. All right, so now we're going to talk about completing the square, but we want to understand the process of completing the square. So how can you write the expression x squared plus bx in the form x plus p quantity squared? It tells us that not every trinomial is a perfect square trinomial. Completing the square is the process of finding the constant, okay, finding the number that we can add to x squared plus bx to create a perfect square trinomial. So we can make any trinomial out there a perfect square trinomial by completing the square. So if we start out, we have the first squared, and it's x and x, so when we multiply that together, it's x squared. We add to that, here I have my next rectangle, the top I'm calling b, this side is still x, so that's bx. Okay. So over here, we took this and we cut it in half. So we said b divided by 2, okay? And so when I multiply that together, it's b divided by 2 times x. So then what's left is this little bitty section down here. And what is this little bitty section? It's b divided by 2 times b divided by 2, or multiplied by b divided by 2. So it's b divided by 2 quantity squared. That's how this formula is derived. Right. So to create a perfect square trinomial, you will add b divided by 2 quantity squared to the variable expression. Okay? So this is what it looks like when we're completing the squared. X squared plus bx plus b divided by 2 quantity squared. That factors to x plus b divided by 2 quantity squared. Okay, so complete the square. So number one, x squared plus 8x plus 5 equals 0. How do I know that I need to complete the square? If I try to factor this, my factors of 5 are 1 and 5. I can never combine a 1 and a 5 and get an 8. So as it is right now, it does not factor. However, by completing the square, we can make everything factor. Okay? So step number one, you want to isolate the variable expression. That means anything that has an x with it, get by itself. So I need to move this plus 5 to the other side. So I'm going to say x squared plus 8x. And then I'm going to put a plus blank here, okay, equals negative 5 plus the blank on this other side. Okay. I just like to add that plus blank so I don't ever forget to add to both sides. Because remember, whatever I do to one side of my equation, I have to do to the other side. So now I have to find the number that's going to make this a perfect square, the number that I'm going to add to both sides. Remember up here we said it's b divided by 2 quantity squared. My b is 8, right? So 8 divided by 2 quantity squared. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So I'm adding 16 to both sides. And that's why I put plus blank on both sides, so I don't forget to add the 16 to both sides of my equation. Okay. So then we want to write the left side as a perfect square. Now I'm ready to factor this side as a perfect square trinomial. So x squared plus 8x plus 16 factors to x plus, and remember, okay, it's the b divided by 2, or the square root of the number that I added to both sides. So the square root of 16 is 4. B divided by 2, 8 divided by 2 is 4. So x plus 4 quantity squared. Okay. Equals, what do I have over here? Negative 5 plus 16, which becomes 11. Okay. So we have just completed the square. So for right now in these problems, we're going to leave it like this. Okay. Let's practice that again. So number 2, x squared minus 6x minus 11 equals 0. All I want to do is complete the square. So again, I notice that what can I multiply together to get negative 11, but add to get negative 6? Nothing. Right now it does not factor. I need to make it factor by making it a perfect square. So I'm going to say x squared minus 6x plus some number equals, I'm moving my 11 to the other side, so 11 plus that same number. Now I have to find out what is that constant. Okay, so it's my b divided by 2 quantity squared. So negative 6 divided by 2, and then I'm going to square that. So negative 3 squared is 9. So I'm adding 9 to both sides. So now this side is ready to factor. So it's x minus, it's always going to have whatever sign this is going to be inside my parentheses. So the square root of 9, 3. Quantity squared equals 11 plus 9, 20. I have completed the square. Okay. So now we're going to take it one step further, and we're going to solve the equations by completing the square. Okay. So remember that when we say solve, we want to know, what does x equal? Right? We're looking for the roots, the zeros, the factors, the x-intercepts. Okay. So again, I look at what can I multiply together to get a positive 3, but add to get a negative 2. Nothing, right? Okay. Because negative 1 times negative 3 would have to get me a positive 3, but there I cannot get a negative 2 out of that, so I need to complete the square. So x squared minus 2x plus some number equals, move the 3 to the other side, negative 3 plus, again, some number. So now what number are we going to be adding to both sides? So that's the b divided by 2 quantity squared. So negative 2 divided by 2 squared. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared, 1 and 1. So now I'm ready to factor my perfect square trinomial. So that's going to be x minus 1 quantity squared equals negative 3 plus 1, which is negative 2. Now we want to solve this. So I'm trying to get the x all by itself. So I have x minus 1 quantity squared. The opposite of squaring something is taking the square root. So take the square root of both sides. So now I have x minus 1 equals, I put the square in the problem, 2 answers, positive and negative, okay, the square root of negative 2. Now I want to work out what is the square root of negative 2. So I have x minus 1 equals positive and negative. So the square root of 2, I cannot do factor tree on that. That's not going to simplify down any. That negative, remember when we were doing complex imaginary numbers, anytime you have a negative underneath the square root, comes out as an I. So plus or minus I, square roots of 2. And finally, to get the x by itself, move our 1 over. So I get x equals 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 2. I have 2 answers there. I have 1 plus I square roots of 2 and 1 minus I square roots of 2. Those are our x-intercepts. Those are our roots, our zeros, our solutions, whatever you want to call them. Remember, they're all the exact same thing. All right, let's do that again. Number 2, x squared plus 4x plus 8. Okay, what can I multiply together to get positive 8, but add to get positive 4? Nothing. It does not factor as it is, so we need to complete the square. So x squared plus 4x plus blank equals negative 8 plus blank. The number that we're going to add to both sides. So we take b, 4, divide it by 2, and square it. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4, so I'm adding 4 to both sides. Now I'm factoring this left-hand side into my perfect square trinomial. That factors to x plus 2 quantity squared equals negative 8 plus 4, negative 4. Take the square root of both sides. X plus 2 equals positive and negative. The square root of 4 is 2, but the negative underneath the radical comes out as I. So I have plus or minus 2i. Move my 2 over here to get x by itself. So I get x equals, remember that we always want to write our answers in standard form, the real number first and then the imaginary. So it's going to be negative 2 plus or minus 2i. Those are the answers to that equation. All right, number 3, 0 equals x squared minus 8x plus 17. What can I multiply together to get 17, but add to get negative 8? Nothing, because my only factors of 17 are 1 and 17. So we need to make it a perfect square trinomial. So again, I'm going to have x squared minus 8x plus some number equals negative 17 plus that same number. Now I have to find that constant that's going to make it a perfect square. I do that by taking my b, negative 8, dividing it by 2, squaring it. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Negative 4 squared, positive 16. So add 16 to both sides. Now we factor our perfect square trinomial. So it's x, again, this is said minus 8x. We always have the same sign. Minus 4 quantity squared equals negative 1. Take the square root of both sides. So I have x minus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 1. The square root of 1 is just 1. That negative comes out as an I. So plus or minus I. Last step, add 4 to both sides. So x equals 4 plus or minus I. Those are our solutions. All right, let's look at some word problems. So completing the square to solve real world word problems. Number 1, Callie plans to create a rectangular pasture enclosure. She has 340 meters of fencing available for the enclosure's perimeter and wants it to have an area of 6,000 square meters. What dimensions should Callie use? And we can see from the picture we have a rectangle. Okay, so let's write down, okay, perimeter and area. So how do I find the perimeter of something? Okay, the perimeter, I add up all the sides. If I have, notice in the picture, this is my length, this is my width. I have 2 lengths and 2 widths. So perimeter is 2L plus 2W. Area of a rectangular is length times width. Okay. So now I'm going to plug in the numbers that they give to me. They told me that we have 340 meters of fencing available for the perimeter. So 2L plus 2W is equal to 340. The area, they told me 6,000 square meters is what we want. So then length times width is equal to 6,000. So now my problem is I have 2 equations and I have L's and W's. I have 2 variables. I need to only have 1 variable. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve for either the length or the width. It doesn't matter which one we solve for. So if I take 2L plus 2W equals 340. And I'm just going to solve for W. So subtract 2L from both sides. So I get 2W equals 340 minus 2L. Divide everything by 2 to get the width by itself. W equals, so 340 divided by 2, 170. Negative 2L divided by 2, just minus L. So I'm going to replace this W with 170 minus L. So when I do that and rewrite my area, I get L times 170 minus L equals 6,000. Okay. So now distribute. So L times 170. Rewrite that as 170L. Okay. So 170L, L minus L, so minus L squared equals 6,000. I have L squareds and L. I want to make my L squared positive. Okay, so I'm going to move everything to the same side. So then I get L squared minus 170L plus 6,000 equals 0. And I'm looking for what can I multiply together to get 6,000, but add or subtract to get negative 170. Nothing. So we need to complete the square. So L squared minus 170L plus something equals negative 6,000 plus something. So now to find that number that we're going to add to both sides, so negative 170, cut in half, and then square that. So negative 170 cut in half is 85 quantities squared, so we get 7,225 is what we're adding to both sides. So now this side will factor, so I get L minus, because there's minus 170L, 85. Quantity squared equals negative 6,000 plus 7,225 is 1,225. Take the square of both sides. L minus 85 equals positive and negative. The square root of 1,225 is a perfect square, so that's positive and negative 35. And so then add 85. So I get L equals 35 plus 85, or L equals negative 35 plus 85. So here, the first one, 35 plus 85, I would get a length of 120. Negative 35 plus 85, I would get a length of 50. All right. So now what would the widths be? So if my length was 120, and I need the width, so 6,000, I could plug it in. 120 times the width would be 6,000. So 6,000 divided by 120, my width would be, let's see, 50. If my length is 50, the width would be 120, and all of these are in meters. Okay. So what do I need? I need 2 sides at 120 meters and 2 sides at 50 meters to get that rectangular pasture. All right, let's look at one more word problem. The relationship between the time since a ball was thrown and its height can be modeled by the equation h equals 32t minus 16t squared plus 4, where h is the height of the ball after t seconds. how long will it take the ball to reach a height of 20 feet? All right, so again, I want to know when is h 20. So 32t minus 16t squared plus 4 equals 20. I'm replacing h with 20. Okay. I'm going to rewrite the left-hand side so that my t squared is first. So negative 16t squared plus 32t. I'm going to get everything on the same side, so I'm going to go ahead and subtract 20. So minus 16 equals 0. I want to factor this. We're going to try to make our life much easier by looking for GCF. So I have a negative 16, positive 32, and a negative 16. They all have a negative 16 in common, so pull a negative 16 out. And then I'm left with t squared minus 2t plus 1 equals 0. So now I want to see, can I factor this? So what can I multiply together to get positive 1, but add to get negative 2? That would be a negative 1. So this factor to negative 16, this is t minus 1 quantity squared equals 0. Trying to solve this, I need to get rid of my negative 16, right? So I could divide by negative 16 and it really just goes away. So t minus 1 quantity squared equals 0. Take the square root of both sides. Square root of 0 is just 0, so I don't need positive or negative. So then I get t minus 1 equals 0, t equals 1. So at 1 second, okay? So it took 1 second for the ball to reach a height of 20 feet. That is where we're going to stop for day 1 of completing the square. Tomorrow we will look at some more completing the square.